So yeah, welcome everybody to this discussion on application security hosted by Face Pacific and their partners at Synopsys and Imperva. As I said, I'm Seamus Byrne and I'm moderating the discussion this afternoon. We really do want to keep this as an informal discussion as possible. I'm sure it would be more informal if we had started with a whiskey tasting and then sort of moved into the discussion afterwards. But for now, we'll just get into a good discussion. And I want to make sure and introduce the main panel of contributors to this discussion. But as I've said, I want to make sure people feel comfortable at any point. If you've got a question, throw it into the chat. If you want to raise your hand and contribute an idea or ask a question on microphone, 100% feel comfortable doing that. And we do have some polls along the way to give some easy little idea contributions and thoughts from everybody gathered here along the way, which is another point that we can bounce off during the discussion. To introduce the team, I'll run down the full list first, and then we'll give each of them a chance to explain their company and their background. We have from Face Pacific, we have Frank Capillari and Bruno Schiavetti. From Synopsys, we have Simon Scaife and Ian Hall. And from Imperva, we have Reinhart Hansen and Craig Porter. So really appreciate everybody being here for today. I did want to kick things off by throwing to the different teams to explain how I guess the three teams fit together and actually work so well together when it comes to working in this application security space. So Frank, I'll start with you. If you could explain a bit about Face Pacific and how it all fits together.
Thank you, Seamus. Welcome all to this roundtable session. As Seamus has said, my name is Frank Capillari. I'm the MD at Face Pacific. Also joining from Face Pacific is Bruno Schiavetti, our technical director, and Shahir Ali is also here from our sales team. This is the first of several sessions that we are planning to host, and we're exploring and discussing many facets of application security today, and hopefully we'll continue that with the ongoing sessions. Face Pacific is a company with some 18 years of experience in test, automation, security, working across a broad spectrum of customers, finance, defense, transport, telecom, and we've been helping customers build robust secure applications for probably about 10 years now. As an organization, we work closely with our customers to determine how we can help reduce risk, consult with them on the tools to implement in their development cycles, and how to protect their applications once they're in production. We've been very privileged as a company to be associated and partner and represent leaders in application security. And today I'm extremely pleased to have our partners from Synopsys and Imperva joining us at this roundtable. With our partners, we believe we're uniquely placed to help our customers deploy end-to-end security strategies from dev right through to prod. And I really look forward today to hearing not only their insights, but also the insights of everyone attending here on their thoughts of how we go about safeguarding enterprise web applications. Throwing it back to you, Seamus.
Lovely. Thanks so much, Frank. Look, I'll also remind folks sometimes a few little tech tips on being part of this sort of Zoom webinar. If you do have a quick thought that you want to share, you can always hit the space bar to go off mute just temporarily. If you just hold it down, that lets you talk while it's held down, and then you can go straight back to mute once you let go. That's a kind of a handy option there. There's also emotes these days. There's little reactions. So if you do just want to react with a random frowny face or some kind of word-free suggestion as to what's happening in the discussion, then you can always use those options as well. And if you don't have the chat window open, then there is the chat button usually in the bottom row of your Zoom options that you can open it up through to be able to throw in questions that way. I'll throw over to Simon Scaife from Synopsys to give us an intro on their part of this work.
Right, thank you, Seamus. Thank you for the warm welcome, and good afternoon, everyone. So yeah, Simon Scaife, Regional Sales Manager at Synopsys. I'm joined by Ian Hall, who is our Customer Success Director for the region. So I look after our key enterprise clients in Australia. I'm personally based in Sydney. Ian looks after the implementation, so the successful outcomes for customers after we have provided them with a solution. So Synopsys, we've partnered with Face Pacific now for just over 5 years, providing Face with the capability to provide customers with application security testing, with our goal of building trust into software. So, our focus is very much securing software as it's being built. This could start from the IDE, with our testing tools integrated in the developer environment, all the way through to QA and even some fuzz testing later in the cycle. So hopefully that gives you a bit of an overview on Synopsys and where we fit.
Lovely. Awesome. Thanks for that intro. And then Reinhart Hansen at Imperva on how you fit into this lovely little dynamic of teams.
Sure. Thanks, Seamus. So I'm Reinhart Hansen, Regional CTO for Imperva for the APJ region. Imperva is really, I guess, if you don't know us, we're a cybersecurity specialist, specifically in the areas of application and data security. And we've got, I guess, a mission to help customers protect their data and all paths to it. And one aspect of doing that is through the vast range of application security controls that we have as part of our portfolio. One of those specifically being RASP, or runtime application self-protection. But we pride ourselves on having solutions that span all the way from, and security controls that span from the network edge down through the data layer itself, and then down to the data stores themselves. So we're very uniquely placed in the industry from that perspective. We see many customers struggling and battling with the web application and API threat landscape, especially with so many new zero-day threats just popping up on almost a daily basis. And the technology we provide really is all about trying to help customers in a very effective and easy way prevent against application vulnerabilities, zero-day vulnerabilities that exist in applications that they buy off the shelf, so COTS applications, as well as those that they develop themselves in-house, right? So your mobile apps, your single-page apps, your apps that really are at the forefront of I guess what you could say the COVID period for DevOps acceleration. There's been a lot of companies that we've seen that have definitely accelerated their DevOps release cycles to meet the requirements of their business and getting to market as quick as they can from an online perspective during this COVID period. And as I say, in the context of the discussion today, we've got many controls, but we'll be specifically focusing on runtime application self-protection. It's a control that's endorsed by NIST as a application security control. So although it's been around for some time, there's not that many people that seemingly know or are aware of it. And it has the ability to not only provide applications protection from zero-day vulnerabilities, but become part of the broader application release cycle process in conjunction with code testing tools like those that are provided by Synopsys and Phase Pacific. So combining technologies provides DevOps teams really the ability to accelerate their engineering efforts and more confidently, I guess, meet application release cycle schedules, right? Which we know, they always hate when security gets in the way of what they're trying to do and prevents them from releasing their apps in a timely manner. So that's how we fit in. It's really being able to accelerate that app development and release cycle experience that we know many customers are struggling with.
Great. Thanks so much for that introduction, Reinhart. We're going to dig into a couple of different areas through this discussion. A lot of them are around sort of business and cultural issues when it comes to trying to ensure that application security is front of mind within businesses. But to sort of start things off, I thought it's always good to point out, I think, what we probably all agree on so that we can then dig into the meatier stuff quite quickly. As a starting point, I think, we agree application security is a very real issue today. It is growing and many businesses are kind of just crossing their fingers. So I think, we want to dig deeper into the issues of moving past kind of hoping for the best and executing on real solutions that offer measurable outcomes, in particular for security and productivity. So as sort of a starting point, but then again from here, please, anybody feel free to ask questions as we go through the discussion. But Frank, as a starting point, I'd love your thoughts on sort of what exactly you feel we're placing into the DevOps process as a starting point for what this is all about.
Sure. Well, I think Reinhart touched on some of the issues just earlier on, but we all know that DevOps is a combination of cultural philosophies, practices, and tools. It is a process effectively designed to increase an organization's ability to deliver applications faster than traditional software development infrastructure management processes, right? Faster than what we're normally used to delivering. And it includes many different facets, the build, the planning, the building, the continuous integration, the deployment, monitoring, etc. I believe there's one extra element that's been sort of inserted there more and more these days, and that is security, hence the emergence of DevSecOps. And I think that's what we're here to talk about today, to see where security plays, not only in application security, but also in that whole DevOps cycle.
Fantastic. Now, look, we have a poll to kick off, a bit of encouragement for people to throw their thoughts in. So we want to just kick off. It kind of bounces off one of the questions people were asked in the registration process, but instead of, we've just kind of pulled out 3 key things. So if we could throw up the first poll question, we're basically asking which AppSec concern is most important to you right now. And we've sort of highlighted 3 main things: process integration, the scanning sort of coverage and accuracy, and then regulatory alignment. It's just a little bit of a kind of curious point. If you can only pick one, which one jumps out for you the most? And I know even I get to pick one apparently. So no, I won't. I promise I'll leave it. I'm not the expert. But everyone else in this room is an expert, so they probably have an opinion on this one. So I know they'll keep an eye on that for a minute and see when most people have thrown in their thoughts, and then we can actually sort of bump that back up and see what different people have thought. But while we're sort of getting that, I'll kick into the next part here. Reinhart, we're coming to you. Do you think decision makers have a clear sense of application security as opposed to general security?
Yeah, good question. Yeah, look, I think application security, as we know, it's a very specific area of cybersecurity, right? And I think specifically with the acceleration of DevOps, as I was saying earlier, largely due to the COVID period that we're going through, and I guess meshing that with the increased use of things like APIs and service mesh-based architectures that everyone's seemingly adopting to deliver their apps, whether they're mobile apps or single page apps. I think there is that awareness of increased security exposure through those mechanisms that certainly CIOs and CISOs are acknowledging, and it has made it. I think application security specifically, it has made it a top priority for them, right? Specifically in those areas, for sure.
Yeah. Over to Simon. I'd love to know you. Oh, actually, yeah, let's check if we've got a result on that little poll. Just always interesting to see. I think they can pop it up and then it'll show us all the results. There we go. Process integration wins the day. Regulatory alignment, sort of, okay, somebody sort of is in there, but most people are focused on accuracy and integration in a process. I guess that makes sense. And look, I mean, it does actually lead in quite well then, Simon, to that idea of within the IT department. Do you see any points of tension there between dev and sec as to how application security is being managed and executed?
Yeah, thanks, Seamus. Great segue. And apologies if you can hear a vacuum cleaner in the background. This is the joys of working from home. Hope it's not drowning out my beautiful voice. But look, I think what we're observing in our key customers at the moment is really a bit of a shift and maybe some friction between dev and sec. So we're seeing, traditionally AppSec tools were purchased by security, were implemented by security, owned by security. We're seeing a lot of that shift now to development with this, shift left, shift everywhere, secure by design methodologies that are being adopted and embraced by enterprises. So I think there is certainly there's a bit of a power struggle in some cases between the departments, and Yeah, that's you know, it's an interesting one to watch. I think from the integration and process alignment, certainly the development organization is better placed to integrate security into their existing pipelines, in the existing CI/CD tools. But then, you know, where does the governance lie? That becomes the challenge, I think, for more senior management. But I mean, those are my observations. I'd love to hear from others from the audience if that's consistent with what you're seeing in your organizations.
Yeah, please. Look, that's a great question. If you do, you know, if you have any thoughts, any of you folks who are gathered here, and feel free to sort of either type it in or use the raise hand option or anything you like when it comes to your thoughts on what is actually going on in this process. While you might be, you know, thinking about something like that, I'll throw it over to Craig. You know, how do you feel like you ensure security is actually truly underpinning the overall DevOps workflow?
Yeah, look, again, good question, mate. I mean, the focus has been really on the dev side of that DevOps equation, and you know, Synopsys and the team have been doing a sort of really good job at, you know, security testing, code analysis, you know, really getting out there and discovering the CVEs. However, on the upside, you know, the answer has always sort of been to patch. And if you come from the security side, or you know, the answer is always to say no. And then from the dev side, it's the response has always been, well, you're holding us up. We need to get this delivered on time. And really that whole answer about patching once the CVEs have been discovered in that DevOps process is sort of really reactive, and it's costly in terms of effort, and it's actually only a point in time solution. I think the better way, and this is where we can help, is the better way is to secure the application itself, you know, have it protected, whether it's an app, a legacy app, a microservice, an API, or a serverless function, whether it's in the cloud or on-prem. I think, you know, having the security travel with the app, and like I said, having the static analysis tools and the tool that Synopsys brings feed into that tool, so then you're sort of got 7x24 protection on the application is sort of really what underpins the security.
Yeah, look, that's a good point. And again, any of the other panelists as well, if you ever do have extra thoughts on any of these things, feel free to jump back in and share. We had another poll question, but rather than hit the poll, I actually let's do it visually. I'd love for, because it's very pleasing that most people do have their cameras on. So this is a yes or no. So we can do it with a hands in the air, thumbs up, thumbs down. But I'm really curious about the fact we've had a few situations over this, you know, even just this year, but certainly over the last year overall, where there've been some very major security incidents related to sort of APIs and lots of those kinds of, you know, different kinds of attacks on company infrastructure. Do you feel like public reports of corporate security incidents have actually increased a sense of urgency around security for your organization's leadership, or are things just sort of carrying on as normal? Thumbs up if you think it has increased awareness or increased any sense of urgency, or thumbs down if things are pretty much normal. Thanks, Kyle. Appreciate it. Yep, got a bit of a thumbs down. I like it. We've got one in the middle. Yeah. So yeah, a few thumbs ups. Yep, a bit of a this way, that way. That's almost like the shaky hand when it's the sideways arrow. So I like that one.
One of the things, if I can just jump in, one of the things I found a couple of years ago, I left my usual comfort zone of finance and banking and got a job at a university, which is it's an adventure. But it didn't feel like it was real until another university got hacked. So until then, you know, cybersecurity was a problem for banks and telcos and government agencies, not universities, never universities. And then ANU got very publicly hacked. And that was when suddenly we turned our whole ship around on cybersecurity.
Yeah, look, that's a great, people almost need to see that familiarity attached to the problem before they react in that way. We've got a great question here from Sally. So if one of the panel could jump in on this, any thoughts about the security aspects of handling client data while reproducing problems in the ops part of the process. Does anybody have a thought to
I
share
can
there?
maybe talk a bit about that. Yeah, so one of the things, and this is a common thing that we see, is exactly that, right? That you've got to try and troubleshoot something, and you need real data to do it. And often it's not really a great idea using a customer's like a real customer's live data, right? So there's obviously data masking tools. Certainly as part of Imperva's portfolio, we have static and dynamic masking capabilities. You can also tokenize the data, right? So there are a number of solutions there that can possibly help with either obfuscating, I guess, the real data from, say, an operator or someone who's diagnosing the problem, but allowing the application to still, work with real lifelike data that isn't masked to the point where it won't uncover things like business logic in an application, or with business logic problems or errors. So keeping the data as real as possible, and that comes down to choosing the right data masking technology and tool set to be able to do that.
And just to follow on from that, is that one of the features that we've built into our RAS solution is actually, as we're watching the requests come into the application, we can actually pick out that bit of data and mask that data that's going through as it's being processed, so that it's protected. So then when we do send it up to a SIEM, that personal information is protected on flight.
That's actually a really good point too. One of the big, I guess, helper factors that RAS brings to the equation is because it lives with the application, and it sees every instruction of the application being executed, and it sees all the payload and all the data that's associated with an instruction or a line of code that's being executed. We have the ability to, as Craig was saying, mask the data before it's potentially sent to some sort of logging mechanism that a developer can use to further investigate, where the issue is. But through the RAS technology, we're able to often identify the exact line of code that has a problem in it, that could be, the next 0-day exploit, as an example, right? So we're able to give you a full stack trace that's very meaningful to a developer in order for them to go off and potentially fix the issue, but at the same time mask any PII data or sensitive data from being exposed to the developer in order to do that.
Yeah, there's a constant tension between the speed of needing to respond to problems, because often there is some security link downstream from that, and also managing the security of not seeing what you're not supposed to see in the process of solving the problem. It seems like that's what we're facing on all of these fronts.
And it's a really good question, actually, because again, I think with the enhancements, you could say, or the changes that are about to happen to the Australian Privacy Act, it's only going to put more pressure on organisations to actually make sure that they're doing the right thing as far as data privacy goes, and who gets to view data and how they're using it and how they're processing it. And this is just one other element to that whole equation that needs to be considered, I guess. So yeah, really good question.
I also just wanted to add on, one of the tools that Synopsys has, our IaaS tool Seeker, is actually able to track sensitive data. You can configure whatever that sensitive data is, and it's able to see it while you're doing those tests. And actually, also another aspect to look at is if you are using this kind of data, that once you're done with the testing, that it's properly removed from the system. I've read about data breaches recently, Tokyo Marine, as well as I think it was the Indonesian COVID track and trace app, where there was old databases that were just sitting around that they were not actually being used, but they were left unprotected, and the data was still there. So even though the data is old, it's still useful to attackers out there. So need to be mindful of that as well.
Fantastic. Really good sharing there. Thanks so much. And again, yeah, if anybody else has any questions, feel free to chime in at any point. That was a fantastic little through line there. Now, wanted to dig into the idea of moving past security being sort of the afterthought that it sometimes becomes, and into getting into the thick of dealing with problems. But Frank, do you kind of think that seeing security slip down the list, so to speak, is a question of budget or apathy, or a mixture of the two, I guess?
Personally, I don't believe it's apathy. Certainly be keen to hear some more inputs from others here today, but I think there's definitely more focus on security these days. Organizations are investing, but that said, there's always a challenge that we see with security teams having to augment their security tools, and obviously they have to justify why, they have to justify the spend, and quite often they're competing on budgets for other activities that the company, their organization is seen as more revenue generating, and that's usually the challenge. It's really trying to demonstrate why the security is needed, how it has an impact on the business itself. We know that the threat landscape changes every day, and it's important for security teams to be able to address the challenges and be on top of those. But as I said, it is a challenge for those management teams within the security environments to justify the need sometimes. I'd certainly be interested to hear from, we have a sort of a bit of a mix of audience here from different organizations. I'd certainly like to hear anyone else's thoughts on this.
I'll leave the floor open for a moment if anybody does feel like they've got a thought they'd like to share. Or if while you're formulating your incredibly erudite response, I'll ask Frank another one.
Thanks.
Look, ACSC priorities actually came up a couple of times in registration responses. So, what are your thoughts on, are you seeing things like the Essential 8 out there, or even just other calls for improvement from government security experts? Is that kind of helping to get orgs off the fence and working harder to meet sort of modern security standards, essentially?
It's interesting you mentioned the ACSC. We actually have representation here today, so perhaps maybe they might wish to comment as well. I'm not going to pinpoint people here, but certainly, look, it's mandatory in federal government. We know that, and I think from what I've seen in just about every state government tender that we've worked on, and we have seen financial institutions and certain telcos who are also adhering to the Essential 8. So my belief is that it's opened up a broader aspect of application security, and it has helped raise the priority in application security more.
Great. Again, if anybody has any thoughts to share at all or ask other questions, that's great. But over to Ian for another question. If we know we have the technology, so what, from your perspective, are the business steps needed to put application security at the heart of the process?
Yeah, thanks, James. Well, so I think Simon touched on this a little bit, that we've got security all over the place, not just shift left. In fact, you do threat modeling in the design phase, you've got your testing tools, and then you've got monitoring and your RASP solution in production. But how do you really get started? I think the very first thing you need to do is you need to understand what you have, because if you don't know what you have, you can't protect it. Which reminds me of a funny question or funny response I often get from customers, because I ask them as part of scoping different deployments is, how many applications do you have? And I get vague answers. Some might ask me, what do you mean by an application? But usually it's something vague, like hundreds, thousands. But yeah, they should know, what is it they're trying to protect. And I think the next thing that you should look at is really having a holistic plan, an overall solution that you're trying to implement. You don't just want to select some tools and make a disjointed solution, because you'll have difficulty in getting the best out of that. So defects will slip through the cracks. So what you could probably look at is use some kind of maturity model, maybe get a consultant to create a roadmap. What is it that you're trying to achieve? Within Synopsys, we publish an open maturity model called BSIM, which is the Building Security in Maturity model. And that helps to kind of quantify how a company or organization is doing compared to others. And you can do point in time snapshots and help give justification for the work that you're doing to management. And I know that this response might seem a bit strange coming from somebody from a tools company. You know, I might just want you'd think that I would want someone to just buy tools, right? You know, we have all these tools, you should buy them all. But the fact is that when I go and do these implementations with various customers, especially those that have just decided to buy a specific tool, the implementation is much more difficult. They don't know how they want the tool integrated into their environment. They don't know which types of defects that are important to them, how to tune the tool. In fact, I had one customer that, you know, as part of the deployment, he threw the OWASP ASVS, which is the Application Security Verification Standard. Basically, it's a set of requirements for having a secure web app. He threw that to me and said, you know, tell me how you meet all of these requirements, which is, it's just not possible if you understand how SAST works. So yeah, so, you know, having that holistic plan will help you get a better solution. So I think those are the couple of things that you could look at.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Ian. And then Craig, this sort of leads into the next section in a way, because we want to get into the idea of, I guess, making things measurable. But, you know, from your perspective, how do we make app security a really clear aspect of performance and success, not just this, you know, thing that lives over there?
Yeah, and look, you know, I'll answer the question more from a DevSecOps perspective, as opposed from a specific application security metric. But, you know, some key metrics to consider is, like, again, how often do you really want to, you know, deliver or get your packages deployed? Are you working on a 2-week or a 4-week sprint? You know, how much functionality is actually built into those packages, right? And how much of that, you know, measured against how many hot fixes that you put in from the CVEs and things that you've discovered. Again, how much value you're actually adding to the customer every time you're doing a deploy, whether it's 2 weeks or 4 weeks. You know, again, how much of the testing is actually automated, whether that be just standard user testing, but also security testing. And then, like I said, how many CVEs are being discovered. You know, they say the stat is what, about 25 vulnerabilities per 1,000 line of code. That's a whole lot of, you know, information. And to make matters worse, 83% of your code is not even yours. It's third-party libraries. It's open source. It's essentially unknown risk. So, I mean, then you sort of try and measure, right, how long does it take to remediate those CVEs? And these are sort of the benchmarks, the measurements that you should be thinking. And in a recent NTT report, application security report, they had 205 days. So most of the year's gone remediating. So when are you actually going to actually release? And if you don't remediate, then it's a risk. So really, essentially what you're doing is flagging it on a risk register, or just pushing it off to the side and adding it to the mountain of technical debt you have, right? So I think one of the reasons why, you know, we're actually joined up together is because, like I said, the guys at Synopsys will help us find those problems within your code. Some of them are security problems, some of them are business logic problems, but they'll help you discover it. But then you've got to release it. So what we will then do is, like I said, take that information. We have tools that will read the reports from Synopsys, put them and configure RAS to then give you that 24/7 protection. What that's essentially doing is letting you buy down the risk of releasing the application without remediating the patches. So again, we talked about the Essential 8 before. One of the challenges with the Essential 8 is coming back to actually getting the effort to patch. So when I go down and talk to the guys in Canberra, most of the time they're patching up to the server level, the OS level, never really getting to the application itself. So it's sitting there unprotected. So they're one of the challenges. But those are sort of measurements that we're sort of looking at doing. And so, you know, securing the application itself allows you to buy down that risk, lets you release on time. You know, it reduces those delays. So you're actually, to measure the success is actually, I'm releasing secure apps out in the public on time. And I think that's the key measure of success in all this.
That's great. Now, we have another poll that we want to throw up. Hopefully I didn't confuse the polling system by skipping a poll earlier. So this one's on the idea of, you know, your organization's leadership on security prioritization, and there's sort of 4 little different ideas we have, from being apathetic or confused to improving quickly or fully on board. I realize I've left out the desperately searching for budget option in that list. But while we're also sort of considering that, if anybody does sort of have any, I guess, good examples of how they've pitched security as an investment and not a cost, or other thoughts that you feel like actually cut through to leadership relatively effectively, if anybody's either had that experience or have heard about others' experiences that have actually been a successful way to have this discussion. And then we'll shortly sort of have a chat about metrics as an idea, but would love to sort of hear if anybody has had or heard stories of really effective ways to have that discussion and move things forward. Sally, great. I'd love to hear it.
For us, security is actually a feature, so that probably takes another step along the path. Yeah. I wanted to pick up on some of the stuff that Craig was saying, where you're talking about the fact that really the general security approach is just to get it right up to the server level and create a closed space where the apps are free to roam and do whatever they do. For us, there's a real change in the way we're delivering apps, in that a whole lot more of it is sitting out there on cloud infrastructure, various layers around it. And that's probably the most important factor in determining how much security as a feature our application has to hold. So not only are we protecting it from outside influences during the development process, but then we're also offering it as a way to navigate a secure space. So I'm interested to hear what other industries might be coming across this, because we're in the defense space, where, as you can imagine, all of this is very relevant. But other industries must also be tackling this, is how do you work with cloud-based infrastructure and balance the need to focus on an app that's standing out there on its own? So,
does anyone have anything to share there?
Yeah, look, and again, this is, I think there's a couple of parts to that. So again, if we, by putting security with the app as opposed to via a WAF, gives you that protection against the 0 days and things like that. If you put a WAF in front of it, you can, like I said, use your signature-based thing to help protect, but that's only protecting the outside in, right? So again, I think the other challenge that people are seeing, and we've just recently sort of come up with a solution around that, is around serverless functions. So the breaking down of the application into a microservice, into that serverless function, even down to into an API, essentially, right, in the ways to communicate. And I think that's, again, essentially been missed, because if you take the API use case, right, there are lots of API gateways, but really all they're protecting is the access and the authorization, so the ability to get the information. But nobody's looking at what information is being pulled out. Nobody's actually looking at the requests being made on the APIs and saying, right, actually, this is a valid request. So I know at Imperva, we have 2 solutions. One is built into our cloud WAF functionality, where we load up the Swagger file and create a positive security model. So anything that's not in that Swagger file that's loaded up in front of the WAF will get blocked. We also use microservices to actually look at the data coming into the app. And then what we'll do is do 2 things. We can actually just classify the data as it's coming through, whether it looks like it's PII data, and then we can also send that up into our cloud environment and do some behavioral analysis on it. So this is expected from this IP. Because we're sort of really focusing on the data bit, the other advantage that we also have, because we spend a lot of time and we sort of do a lot of work integrating our solutions. And this is where Synopsys comes in. They're doing all the SAST and task testing. So this conversation is really about integrating into them to do that development cover that development element. But once you sort of get into production, we can essentially, like I said, use our tools, whether it be the cloud WAF, whether it be RASP, whether it be our database access management, and actually give you a truer picture of the request being made. We can actually, again, as I said before, we can enhance the data to say, right, this came from this IP address, this came from this API, this came from this mobile device, because we're collecting that information in the WAF. And then, like I said, as we're looking at the requests coming through, we can add value and protect that information. And this is a sort of, like I said, it's a space that a lot of people are starting to understand. Now, again, what you do have to be careful about is what technology, because this is, when we're talking about cybersecurity, I think one of the biggest challenges everybody has is there's 10 different products out there, 10 different solutions to actually trying to solve it. And I said, and they all seem to be a little bit disjointed. So, and that's what's good about today's conversation is it's collaborative. We're working with partners to actually look at that whole process and give you that end-to-end protection.
Great. Patrick has his hand up there to share some thoughts or ask a question.
I was just going to add on to something Craig said about refactoring when you're moving stuff to the cloud. Like if you're just forklifting a server from a data center into AWS or Azure or wherever, it's not really any more secure. But I mean, the reason I've been banging the drum of DevOps and DevSecOps for must be 10 years now is my background is banking and finance. I'm used to being audited constantly. And now I'm in higher education, still getting audited constantly. If everything's automated, I can prove stuff. If everything's manual, I can't. And when I first started working at Macquarie Bank, I mean A Bank, many years ago, the auditors would come around and we'd be terrified because they'd ask questions we couldn't answer. Who had access to this system at this time 6 months ago? I have no idea, and I have no way of finding out. With automation, I can tell you exactly who had access. No one, because it was an automated system. If somebody logged in, it would have triggered an alert in the NOC. So those sort of building on top of it, and we can't consume them the same way. I'm fighting a double battle at the moment of trying to move the university to a crowd-first model, or at the same time trying to build a space where we can collaborate with Department of Defense or similar organizations. And there's no right or wrong for everything, but it's, in my experience, we've always been in a better position by moving to a cloud and doing it in a smart way, even if it does take a bigger investment. And it's not always easy winning that investment.
Yeah, that's a great point. Anyone else have anything to share on that sort of thread? It's a really interesting, I think, thread overall that we're pulling on there. No, that's all right. Look, Simon, we wanted to sort of come to you next with another one of the questions. What do you see as sort of some of the roadblocks that you see clients facing, out there in terms of, I guess, getting these sorts of projects over the line?
Yeah, very interesting. I think it ties probably back into the budget conversation. So, what we've observed certainly in our key customers is, budgets certainly aren't going up. If anything, they're going down, let alone staying constant. So some of the key challenges I think are, working out who's paying for application security. Other line items on the cybersecurity side have been, they've been in place for years, right? And no one would dare to turn off email filtering or firewalls or endpoint security. But with AppSec, where there's been that friction and sort of shuffle of power, it certainly made it difficult in terms of who's contributing the funds to pay for this. So I think, one of the key things is, how do people demonstrate the return on investment from application security? It's very difficult to report on the absence of defects in a lot of areas. People are struggling, telling us they're struggling with coverage, seeing who's scanning, where they're scanning, what they're scanning. So yeah, look, I think it's a really important question. But from our side, anything we can contribute to capture the right metrics to demonstrate the the effectiveness of AppSec will certainly help people justify the funding. We had a key customer produce a fantastic internal deck. She was presenting to her seniors and went through using one of our testing tools, just the sheer number of defects they found in the first 6 months. Then applying a reasonable, this would have taken someone 6 hours, a developer, security analyst, 6 hours to fix per defect. And when you start multiplying out those numbers, it was a very significant, large, seven-figure number. So that was a great example, I think, of even with a very basic metric, demonstrating the value of AppSec.
Fantastic. Now, Frank, what are some of the metrics that you think business leaders should be considering when making investments in security, or AppSec in particular? Yeah.
Yeah, look, yeah, that's a good question. Metrics is always a tough one sort of to put forward, but I guess while each organization has different drivers to help justify their spend, I think some of the considerations that we've seen in talking to certain customers, firstly, knowing the risk landscape and how it applies to their particular business, identifying what is the impact to the business should there be a breach. I think that's important. The cost to the business itself in remediating, and as Simon gave a great example there, providing a cost to justify implementing certain tools and the productivity gains that might come out of that. Cost of downtime. We often see the breach can cost more than can cause more in lost revenues, brand image, etc., than adding perhaps tools. Time to detect. I think we've all seen recently the impact of not detecting a breach until it's too late. And I'm not going to say which one it is. I think we all know, but some breaches can be avoided with the right sort of strategies in place. Being able to remediate and fix the problem, but not only fix it, also putting strategies in place to prevent further breaches. There's additional steps that are required to be implemented before a product is released. So these are some of the things that we've seen our customers look at. And I think it was Craig mentioned earlier, understanding third-party risk. I think that's really important as well these days. This can be quite a weak link in the chain. There are many of the development houses using third-party applications either as part of their solution or in some instances perhaps outsourcing the entire development to third parties. So understanding that third-party risk, I think, is also very important, and understanding its impact to the business is very important.
I think that last one's a really good point. The third-party code risk, right? I mean, we know, from what we've seen that 80–90% of the code in most applications that you write, and it's not your code, right? It's reused libraries, it's reused, IP that's either open sourced or provided by some other third party. And how do you protect yourself against vulnerabilities in that, right? I think that's a real struggle, and we've seen even the best of them in recent days become subject to unknown or zero-day vulnerabilities, right, through supply chain attacks.
That's right.
So some of the tooling that we're talking about here, and in particularly RASP, is one of the if we roll back a little bit from a third-party supply chain risk or software supply chain risk, the US federal government actually came to Imperva and asked us if we could extend our RASP capability to off-the-shelf applications, things like SolarWinds. So we specifically released a version of our tooling that now works, because historically it only worked with applications that you developed yourself, but we've extended that capability now to work with off-the-shelf applications like SolarWinds, and have proven quite extensively to the US federal government that it's an effective control in preventing the zero-day software supply chain attack type issues that we keep seeing happen, right? I mean, SolarWinds is probably a good recent example, but if you roll back historically, these are not new type of attacks, right? It's just that they're becoming more frequent and more publicized. Well, I'm sure we're all aware of the Apache Struts type attacks. I mean, they're all essentially third-party software supply chain attacks, right? That the technology we're talking about here from Imperva, RASP, can definitely help you defend against, right? And help you mitigate, even if you don't have control of the source code, even if you don't have control of what third-party vendors are doing with their code. So it's something to definitely consider as part of an overall strategy against defending against these types of vulnerabilities and exposures that apps seemingly are always being targeted for. And let's not forget that why apps are being exploited, right? Cyber criminals are not doing this for the fun of it, right? They're doing it to get your data, right? Or an organization's data. Every web app, every API, behind it, there's a database, right? There's a data repository, usually in a lot of cases with PII data in it, sensitive data, right? That's what they're after. So, we're talking about one mechanism here from an application security perspective, but there's obviously a deeper view here to go down to the data layer and actually do the right things around controls that you put around your data directly. So taking that more data-centric approach to security and an extension really of application security and what we're talking about here.
And just to follow on, I do think that, let's say just take it up another level. One of the things that we're seeing a lot of, take CVA as an example, right? The CIO became the CEO. We all becoming digital organizations. So I think that, we, as aside from trying to solve this problem with technology, we should also be training up. I recently listened to a great podcast from the CIO of Bendigo Bank, and let's say talking about the whole transition to the cloud and what they did. One of the cool things that they did was 15-20% of their training was given to the business people, given to the non-technical developers and things like that. So they actually understood what the cloud was about. They actually understood that, hey, this is something that needs to be protected. Because again, the guys don't see it. I have a lot of conversations with product managers, and they don't actually understand the underlying technology that sort of is powering through. They have an idea, but don't actually understand the impact. And if trying to protect that. I mean, I remember talking to, I have funnily enough a banking and finance background, and talking to somebody running a payment gateway for one of the banks we won't mention. He goes, "What is cybersecurity?" It wasn't. He was more interested in processing people's payments and earning merchant fees from it.
I often joke that I've worked at every bank in Australia except ING, and that's why I bank with them, because ignorance.
Yeah. Oh, okay. No, it's okay. Listen, I spent 3 years just building out a contact center payment gateway place, and it's just the amount of data that's sort of sitting around places that is just loosely, and again, just the only we people could access that data, let's say, just by having a bearer token.
Look, yeah, we're about to run out of time for the main sort of discussion here, but I thought I'd throw to Ian for just a couple of really quick stories on examples of clients that have had really good outcomes from using these sorts of processes. I guess if we get a quick story from Synopsys and then a quick one from Imperva, and then we'll get Frank to wrap up before we let the whiskey folks into the room.
All right, thanks. Actually, I just wanted to touch on that supply chain risk very quickly.
Yeah.
So at Synopsys, we have a Black Duck, which is our software composition analysis tool, and obviously it will help you when you have the source code to find which of the open source that you're using. But actually, we also have a component that can scan binary files. So even if you don't have the code, you can still find some of the open source that is embedded there, and find for more vulnerabilities than you would normally. But in terms of like a customer where they're seeing real value, I wanted to talk about a manufacturer of freight cars, so also involved in rail supply chain. So they came to us and they had lots of defects getting through to production. They didn't have good adoption of their existing security tools. So obviously they wanted to try and reduce costs and drive efficiencies around that. And so what we did from the client services team as part of a worldwide rollout of tools is implemented our cloud version of our SaaS tool, Coverity. We also implemented Black Duck. And so we worked together with our security consulting team as part of a larger program. And so that also included a security specific pipeline and also e-learning. And so the results of that was that within a short time frame, around 3 months, we were able to deploy to 150 different applications. And so that provided just like a baseline of security for this organization. They can run other tools in different business unit, but it reduced their support costs because less of the defects were getting through to production, the releases were not getting delayed. So I think in short, it gives them that level of increased confidence. And I think that the key here, one of the reasons was interesting because it came from the poll earlier about process integration. So because we had a good holistic solution, we were able to integrate it better and to be less disruptive to the customer. So we got a lot of good press internally, which helped to take the implementation from those initial teams to encourage others to get involved. If we had gone one tool at a time, it would be more disruptive, and I think that it would be much harder to see the benefit of us of this overall solution. So I think it ties nicely to what we're talking about today. Phase Pacific and Imperva and Synopsys all working together with the solution.
Yeah, it's quite interesting. And I know you're going to jump to me and give our use case, but I mean, one of the great things we're jointly working on with a joint customer between Synopsys and Imperva in the US is actually to complete that whole DevOps feedback loop. So again, we're taking their CVEs that are being discovered through the testing. We're then protecting the RASP. And one of the things we talked about earlier was around the whole enrichment process. Well, one of the things that we're doing now is actually pulling out the CVEs and actually using that Black Duck database to actually provide the color. So again, it's sort of, another sort of like I said, we just haven't dumped a CVE up into your C. We've actually added context, and I found out we were getting that context from Black Duck. So
that's really great.
Another little great story. Look, we have a customer, Sun Life in Canada. They're a life insurance company, about $1 trillion in assets. They were struggling to maintain and 600 WebLogic servers. And essentially each one of those WebLogic servers had multiple applications on it. And the patching effort was just, every time, because it was an application, it had to go back through that whole SAST and DAST testing process. So it was just adding time. They had this ideal, this measurement to, release every 4 weeks. Well, that wasn't happening because half their staff and half their resources were worried about patching WebLogic. The other half was actually doing some real development. But they actually survived, got hit by a supply chain attack. We stepped in there, helped them solve it. But what we did was actually embed that whole RASP technology into the CI/CD pipeline. So anything that was a critical or a high level app, we would automatically be included in there, and we would be protecting that runtime environment. And essentially, it stopped them having to continually patch these servers. It actually saved them a bomb in support fees, and they sort of said, look, we can't give you the exact number, but we're probably saving $1 million in time and effort every year from putting in runtime protection and automating that process.
That's fantastic. So look, we're over time. Frank, I'd love you to give us a final thought on what you hope people, I guess, take away from this overall discussion. And I hope you've enjoyed yourself too.
Thank you. I hope everyone has enjoyed themselves today. I hope it's been of value, and I want to thank everyone for being here and for their contribution. I guess, look, there's a lot of good points that were made. Just three points, I think, three key ones. One is, I guess we're still all learning in many regards as to what's important, what's not in terms of security. There's certainly different challenges based on the different business requirements, and those different business requirements drive the security needs. Some good examples there from Ian and Craig on two different examples, what drove certain implementations of tools to help save money for the business. So security can be applied at different stages and can provide and generate good business returns for the environment depending on the needs. And I guess that's what we're here for as an organisation, Phase Specific, to help bring partners like Synopsys and Imperva together. And we're very, very pleased to be able to do that, and very grateful for their contributions today and their stories today. And that's all I have to say.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much. We could throw up that last poll result that we took a while ago, but then we just got into such a good flow of discussion that we, that's good. Look, improving quickly, I think that's, let's focus on that one rather than the still confused. That's a positive result overall. 55% is in the improving quickly or fully on board category. So we'll call that the win there. Look, thank you all so much for coming. We have the whiskey folks about to sort of join in, but I really, again, just want to call out our, the great team, Frank and Bruno at Phase Pacific, Craig and Reinhart from Imperva, and Simon and Ian from Synopsys. Thank you all for joining us. And hopefully, again, feel free to keep chatting. Patrick, I specifically want to ask if that is a live feed camera as your background, because it looks like a very nice little nerdy setup you must have put together to make that happen.
Yeah, I'm using OBS. So I've got two webcams. One faces out the window at the front of my office, and the other one obviously faces me. And behind me, I have a green screen. So if I lift up the green screen, the background disappears, and you see the mess that is my office. But it's not. I can see when the post is delivered because my monitor's too big. I can't see over it to see out the window. And I don't know if anyone noticed, but just over my shoulder and up this side, there's a creepy face in the bushes. That's my boss. I've been trolling him for weeks, hiding him in every background I have.
That is brilliant. Look, thank you again. And I guess we can, if Frank has any sort of other final thoughts, otherwise we can, let the whiskey crew take over from here. And again, if anybody needs to leave now, again, thanks so much for your time. And I'm sure there's plenty of follow-up discussions that can be had. If you need to know any more, just contact the Phase Specific team.